tried learning n8n 4 times and I failed every single time. I watched tutorials, I built complex workflows, and nothing stuck. The 5th time though, I built over 100 workflows in 6 months. The difference wasn't me getting smarter, it was just changing how I approached it. Here's the exact 30-day roadmap I would follow if I was starting from scratch. My mistake was just jumping into tutorials, building workflows that I couldn't even understand. First, I'd recommend you write down one repetitive process that you do daily. Then choose one thing, ideally something that takes you at least 30 plus minutes weekly, so it can have some significance for automating. And then once you've actually documented and you've chosen the one thing you would want to automate, that's when we get to the build. And this looks like a simple workflow, but trust me, this is going to make all the difference. And with a lot of the n8n workflows, I like using Escaladraw, which is this tool right here. This is a tool that I come back to when I'm building complex or even simple workflows and I just want to sketch it out. This is still a great tool to use. So if you recall the earlier diagram, once you've nailed and documented your one thing that you want to automate, now we're good to start with n8n. I would recommend going to n8n.io, which is you go to the screen here, just get started. They have a 14-day free trial. That's how I started. And once you sign up, you're going to see something like this. And then you're just going to create a new workflow, which is going to be somewhere in the top. And you're going to see something similar to this. And so we're going to create a simple 2-3 step node. And it's going to have a trigger and it's going to have an action. So it's going to be really straightforward. And I think that this is honestly the best way to start, because once you get that small win, it compounds over time. And eventually you start getting bigger wins. And before you know it, you'll start building workflows consistently. So the first thing is any workflow is going to have a trigger. It could be manual. It could be a scheduled trigger. And for this case, we'll just make it manual, but this is what it looks like. And if you want to bring that up, you would just have to choose that plus sign. So in this case, I'm going to hit trigger manually because we're going to run this manually. But you could trigger by chat. And again, you can also trigger by a schedule trigger. So let me just show you what that looks like. So you can just pick, days, minutes, weeks, and you can be specific on the time, the amount of time that happens, or the gaps between the days. You can get really custom on how often and when this workflow can trigger. This is how I run my automations. Is when it becomes truly autonomous, is you can run something like this. It'll just kick off. Whether you remember or not, it's just going to kick off, which is really cool. And so in this case, we have the manual workflow. Now we're going to add a Gmail node. It's one of the most common ones, and we're going to send a message. And so here you can see this screen. My account is already linked up, but when you first sign up, you're going to have to set up your own credentials to authenticate. Once you do that, it's straightforward. You don't have to do it over and over again. So in this case, I'm going to add an email. I'm going to add, this is a test. I'm just going to put message or message sent. I know this is not the best, but just going to execute it. And just to recap, this is how it is. Once you start building more nodes, it's just good to add nodes so you can understand what they do. So you can segment different sections within the workflow to help you just better either debug and just to better understand how it flows, because you will forget even if you build it from scratch. So we're going to remove that and then we're going to hit run. You can always execute from the top. And so in this case, I just did that, but I could have just hit this button and hit execute, hit P button on your keyboard, and this pins it. This is really important because if you're using some tools like Appify or something where you don't want to have to rerun because it either takes long or actually costs money, especially with AI agents, you want to pin it, especially when you're debugging or testing a workflow. That's just another hack. And so in this case, I just sent the email. Let's see if I got it. So as you can see, I got it here. Here it is. Now you've got your first workflow. Now let's talk about the nodes that actually matter. So with n8n, there's a whole bunch of nodes. I personally don't use all of them, but I know there's a whole bunch and they're probably adding some throughout the year. But you'll find out that most of the nodes you don't need, you just need the main ones. So some of the ones that I use a lot are just a few. I'm going to cover 6 to 7. We'll start with database nodes. You got to store the data somewhere. Data comes in and data has to come out somewhere. And so if you're running an AI agent, you're running a Google Sheets, even this email, you want to store that information somewhere. You can use something like Google Sheets, which is free. Eventually, in my opinion, you may want to transition to something like Airtable. It's also free. It does have a paid tier, but you can go far with the free version. And the reason I like Airtable is because it's more API friendly. So when you're running workflows and you're outputting a lot of information, if you sometimes output like multiple records at once, Google Sheets will blow up, meaning it will just give you an API limit error. I just find that annoying and found it so much easier to transition to Airtable, and I haven't gone back. Another node that I like to use is the code node. And it sounds scary because if you don't know how to code, it's probably the last node you would probably want to use. But trust me, this is going to be your best friend when you're working with n8n workflows because it can do a lot. Sometimes it's easier to use it and it's more efficient because you can do a lot more. You can make this as complex as you need. Right now it's basic, but you can do filtering with this. You can do some advanced like calculations. So the code node really comes in handy. There are certain tools that you can use to do calculations, but with the code node you can just do it in one shot, and is that node that you can just keep referring to over and over again. Another tip before I move on to the next node is changing the names, because you're going to go back and as you're running the workflow you're going to forget what's what, especially if you have multiple code nodes. You're going to forget what each one does. So this could be something like filter emails, for example. Maybe the emails are coming in and you want to categorize by how long they are. You're doing this experiment for whatever reason. And with this code node, you can do that. It'll grab the data and then you just manipulate it with JavaScript logic. And it sounds fancy, but you can just go to Claude, which is what I do, and just tell it what you want to do. Feed it the input data, how this comes out. And basically Claude will give you the code. You just paste it in here and it would do the filtering for you. Now I went to Claude. Basically, I'm going to use this node. I didn't think I was going to cover this, but this is another node you could use. And this is useful for many reasons, but I'm going to repurpose it for this. And so I'm going to run it. And there you go. I'm glad I got an error because now I can just feed it to Claude, paste it in, and then it'll just tell me what the fix is right now. Most likely it looks like it's in the wrong format. So there you go. So whenever we paste this back, run it, it works. And so the reason I did that is because in this case, we're sending an email. We're not getting any information. And to avoid running it again, I'm just going to pin it by pressing P. And then here now we have fake email. We're going to pretend that we just took emails from our inbox. And now we're going to use the code node to filter it. So I'm going to ask Claude, help me create a code node logic to filter emails by subject line to only pull emails from John Smith. I should probably be using Sonnet, but I forgot to change it. All right, so now here is the logic. Paste it, run it, and there you go. So that is the beautiful part of using the code node. It's just a small example of an easy way to do this. Could you have used a filtering node? Yes. But sometimes it's just easier to use a code node. And so another code node that is probably helpful is an HTTP request. But this is one that you're going to use, for example, if you were to query like Sora 2 or OpenAI or some other API. This is when this will come in handy. You need to input the URL and then define if you're going to use get, post, which are the most common ones. And I use this, for example, on a Perplexity request. Even though there's a Perplexity node, I find it better to use this because you have more control on the parameters. You don't need to understand that. Maybe you don't even need it, but in my use case, I did need that specific parameter, so I did it via the HTTP request. Another one that's important is the wait node. So let's say you were querying a video for Sora 2, right? And you were rendering a video. You submitted your prompt, you're waiting for the video. It's not going to just generate it in seconds. It's going to take maybe a minute or two, or maybe more. And so what you do is you would hit a wait node. It would basically run. It'll check the status of the video. Is it done? It'll wait. Actually, no, it waits a certain amount of time and then it checks the status. So there's another request that checks the status. And if not, it'll loop back again. It'll keep looping basically. The wait node is important, especially if you're using like an Appify request. You're going to submit something. It's going to take some time to wait to get back to you. So that's typically the times you're going to use a wait node is when you're submitting a request somewhere via API and you're waiting for it to respond back. And switch and if are sort of the same. I use them both, but it just depends on your use case. This, you can have multiple conditions. So let's say the value is status, or that's the status and it's pending. And I usually like to rename it. And let's say the status is done. And so this is what the switch will look like. So in this case, that's how it will look. If you're running the video request, right? And maybe this is the wrong one, but it'll look like this. It'll wait, it'll ping the API to check the status, whatever service you're using, and let's say the status is done, then it moves to, that's when you can create the next flow. Maybe it's done at, you can have like, it goes to another code node, and maybe if it's pending, then you want it to loop back. So that's typically how it works. I'm not affiliated with Potato, but I use that to schedule social media. I use Notion. I mean, there's a whole bunch. And one of the most important ones is the AI agent. This is probably the most important in my opinion. And the reason is because this is where a lot of the magic happens. So in this case, let's say you got the emails, right, from John Smith, but let's say it had a body. I didn't put a body, but let's pretend it did, or even subject lines. You can have the AI agent analyze that by changing it to expression, and you can say, help me analyze these subject lines. And you see how it pops up? And so let's say this one had 10 John Smith emails, or maybe it had all of them. All of them would pop in here. It's almost like you're pasting on ChatGPT and saying, analyze this for me, which leads to the model. I personally use Open Router, signed up for the API. But once you do, just go to Open Router. You can tell I'm logged in. You'll here. I'm not going to go in here because they're my keys, but you'll see everything in here. You can track all your spending across multiple API requests. So meaning like if you're using OpenAI, Claude, Perplexity, if you keep them all separate, it's going to be hard to keep tallies of like what's your spending. So you can set budgets with this, and you can keep using the same exact node over and over again. The biggest thing is you can see all the models, but that's pretty much it. This is not really an AI agent at this point. It's no different than going to ChatGPT and pasting a request. What makes this an AI agent though is these separate tools. You can add memory, you can add tools. So if I wanted to add Airtable, I can say, hey, look at this and compare it to my current database. Do any of the subject lines match? For whatever reason, if yes, skip it, or if not, do X, Y, and Z. So that's just an example of the tools you could use, and you could do more. You could even attach sub-agents within this agent. So there's another agent running below it, and then this one reads that data for you. So for example, you can have an AI agent doing a Perplexity research, and then analyzes that information, and then this one reports back to you. I don't tend to use those a lot. I just tend to use a single call with the tool and the memory. That's about it. This should give you a good idea of some of the nodes that you're using. You can tell already it looks complex, but this could be a simple workflow. Let's just pretend you're pulling your email, you're analyzing it, filtering it through certain subject lines, and then feeding that to AI to analyze. And then maybe you want that to once AI outputs, you want to organize that information, and then you want to post it on Airtable. And that's it. That could be a workflow. I would organize it a little bit more to debug and to understand how it flows. You can even add a canvas, which is something I recommend and getting the habit into. You don't have to make it complicated. I would just start like this. You're done. But once you start doing more of these workflows, if you want to understand how they run, or just make it a little more visually easier to maneuver as you're debugging it or running it, then those canvas can help, especially if you forget certain details. So these are the nodes, but here's where things actually click. So now here's a production workflow, something that I actually use weekly. It's something that took me a few weeks of iteration, and I like to keep things simple. So another tip that I would recommend is just making it run, even if it's not perfect. If you sit there trying to make it work so hard, especially if you don't understand the process or you're just testing a process, it's going to be a waste of time because the next week or the next 2 weeks, you're going to change it anyways. So you might as well just get it running. I wouldn't obsess too much about the models. Just get something basic running, and then over time, you'll iterate. You'll change the models. You'll figure out what works for you. You'll change a little bit of the nodes. So visually, it organizes everything versus having everything cluttered, as you saw in the earlier workflow. But even then, for a first workflow, it's not bad to have it all blank. And it's personal preference, really. I'd rather have something that works versus something that looks pretty, or spending like an hour or two making it look pretty when you could just be running it or doing something else. And so here it is. It starts weekly. It triggers on a Friday at 7 a.m. So this runs automatically without fail. And here's the Perplexity node using an HTTP request. So it just gives me better quality output. And so basically here, the workflow kicks off querying Perplexity, cleaning that information, feeding it to AI. And so in this case, you can see I'm getting the research that was done by Perplexity and then have instructions. And basically I'm telling AI, hey, take this news, tell me which news is relevant, and then give me a hook, give me a couple talking points from this, a summary, things that just makes it easier for me to consume and just talk about it as I'm going to create content for the following week. Once AI is done running, it outputs its data, and then I organize it. And once it's organized, I just feed it to Notion. I add it to a special database. So you can see it's my idea database. I open this record. You can tell it's coming from Perplexity because here's the tag. And then this is what it looks like. It comes from an n8n blog. It tells me the publish date. It tells me a summary. Get the hook, the angle, and just potential talking points. So if anything, I can go back to the source. And I like that as giving me a lot of recent information, which is important, especially if you're going to cover like a news or something recent. And so this just saves me time, honestly. Can you go to Perplexity and do it yourself? Yes. I would actually recommend you do that until you have something that's working before you automate this. This took me a few iterations because I didn't use Perplexity as often for this specific use case, but I had an idea what I wanted and I just kept iterating over time. Now let me save you from the mistakes that cost me months. Starting off with the first one, chasing complexity. A 6-node workflow always beats one that's 40 nodes. I've seen it on X. I've seen it on different social media platforms. People brag and they get a lot of people to sign up to comment or social media posts to get this spaghetti workflow that's like 100 nodes. It looks impressive. It looks like it's doing a lot, but honestly, it's fake. In my opinion, it's garbage. If that workflow ran perfectly every single time, it wouldn't be an issue. But even then, imagine understanding everything. It's too hard to follow, right? Number one. But number two, if something ever breaks, imagine having to debug that. You'll have to pin a lot of nodes. You have to spend more time debugging than actually running it. And I know this firsthand because I've built complex workflows that were just way too complex. I forgot how they work. And I would spend more time debugging and I just give up. So simplicity is always what I'm after. Like the workflow you saw earlier is simple, but it delivers consistent news, which is why the first step of documenting your own process is the most important step, because those are the workflows that you'll build that actually have impact to your business or to your personal workflow versus chasing something that's working for somebody else or that's generic. Because even if you take somebody's workflow, especially if it's complex, you have to understand it. You have to make it work for you. And it's going to take more time debugging that versus just starting from scratch or working off a simple workflow. And then trap number 2 is, I already hinted on this, the free workflow bundles. If it's too good to be true, it is. If something was really working, people wouldn't give it away for free. It takes a lot of time to build workflows. I'm all for giving away free workflows, but if you have a workflow that took you months to iterate, you're not going to get it away for free. Definitely leverage free workflows. Go to n8n.io. They have templates. Definitely go to GitHub and just search and play around. You'll find a lot of cool workflows completely for free. The magic isn't really the workflow. It's actually modifying it and making it work for you, because that workflow may use nodes that you're not familiar with. And this is why it's important, because if you start automating before understanding a process, you're just scaling something that's broken. If you're trying to post on social media and thinking that you're going to build this AI agent that's going to give you viral tweets, it's just not going to happen. You need to understand the platform. You need to understand what is a good tweet. And that's something that I've learned multiple times. And this is why I'm constantly refining my workflows, because I'm learning more on social media. And so I'm making updates. And the final one is just common sense. I think if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Now, last thing, let's talk real cost, because I feel a lot of people lie about this. And so n8n starts at $24 a month. If you sign up for the 14-day free trial, you can do that for free. And then I wouldn't recommend doing self-host as much as people praise it, at least not in the beginning, because it's complicated. It's not just a couple clicks in my experience. It does take some time. It took me a few weeks to get used to it and to transition. But if I would have just started off the bat, it would have been super confusing. I would have probably given up. So I recommend just starting with the $24 a month, pay it for a few months. And honestly, if you're saving, if the ROI is there, you may not even need to switch. It's worth just paying the $24. There is perks about paying. It's easier to update and it's going to break less. So you're going to have a lot of less issues that you would have if you self-host. And self-host really is about $4 to $5. I use Hostinger. That's a tool that I do like, and it's dedicated hosting. So there's the difference. There's tools like Railway that allow you to host n8n, but it's shared hosting, which means slower and it's more expensive. Ironically, there was times when I was using it, I thought I was smart, and I was spending like $15 a month, and it wasn't even as good. I probably would have been better off paying the $9 more and just honestly just go to n8n Cloud. Personally, Hostinger for me works. It's $5 a month, and I would create another tutorial on that because there's definitely some quirks to avoid and just a good way to do it. But it can be $4 to $5 a month if you get the 2-year plan, but you have to do more hand holding. There's certain quirks that happen with it. So for example, this is just my experience, but if you were to save the workflow and then let's say you were to run it tomorrow, it would have your old workflow version, the previous one. And a workaround that I've done is to, after you publish it, unpublish it and then republish it. It's annoying, but it's just another thing that you have to look out for. And I forgot to mention, there's an n8n subscription plus AI spend. I mentioned OpenRouter. This is why I like it, because you can keep track of your spending. So that means every single time you're using AI to analyze, whether it's social media, whatever it is, you're spending money. It just depends on your workflow, but it can be $100 or more. Plus, even if you self-host. So really the most expensive part of this setup can be AI itself. It's not really n8n, it's AI. Because you can spend $20, $30 in a week because you're just testing and debugging stuff. That's the real cost in my experience. I've probably spent anywhere between $15 to $30 a month, maybe a little higher if I'm ever testing a lot, a workflow, and I'm just rerunning it because I have to test the output. There's no way around it. And I'm just constantly running, and it adds up. To recap, document one process, pick one workflow, and then just build it. Sign up for n8n free trial. You have 14 days. That's how I first started. I committed to building something in those 14 days because I didn't want to end up paying for something, especially if I'm not going to use it. So you can do that trick where you sign up and then cancel. That way you don't get hit if you don't end up using it. But I recommend you just sign up with the 14-day trial, but with planning already done ahead of time. That way you're already ready to go, and you're going to maximize those 14 days to hopefully get ROI value, and then actually keeping the subscription. And then if you so choose, you can transition to a self-host with something like Hostinger. So I hope this video was helpful. I'm documenting every workflow I build, the ones that work, the ones that failed, all of it. Not just n8n, but just personal workflows like Claude Code, ChatGPT. If you like this type of content and want to understand the stuff that's working, then check out my newsletter where I send an email weekly. Links in the description.